Hello, Chamber Presidents, Executives, Committees and Chamber Leaders. Welcome to today's Business New South Wales webinar. My name is Dan Macias and I'm the General Manager of Memberships, Partnerships and Strategy here at Business New South Wales. Now, first and foremost, I might as well go for the elephant in the room. I've got a bit of a lurgy at the moment, so please excuse my huskiness. I am pushing through to get this webinar done today. It did have me down off work 3 days last week, so I think I'm over the hump, but I've still got the lingering voice. So my apologies in advance if it comes through a little bit gravelly than normal. But thank you so much for joining today's joint webinar hosted by Business New South Wales and Jemena, exploring the role of gas and renewable gas in powering New South Wales industry through the energy transition. I'd like to start today's proceeding by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians on the land on which this webinar is being recorded today. I would also like to pay my respects to all elders past and present, any Indigenous peoples on this call, and the traditional owners on the lands on which you are located from too. Before we get started on today's content, just a reminder that we are going to be taking live questions. As always, please visit www.slido.com. That's www.slido.com and use the hashtag chamber, CHAMBER, and we can get the live questions up and running. We really like to make these sessions interactive, so please, if something piques your interest, do ask a question so we can get it up in the Q&A. So as energy markets evolve, gas continues to play a critical role in maintaining reliability, supporting industrial competitiveness, and enabling decarbonisation, particularly for sectors that cannot readily electrify. This session will unpack both how natural gas and renewable gases like biomethane, e-methane, and green hydrogen can work together to deliver affordable, flexible, and lower emission energy solutions for businesses. You'll hear from experts on the practical opportunities for businesses to reduce costs, strengthen energy resilience, and prepare for a low carbon future. We're lucky enough to have two amazing speakers today who can bring in insights from policy, infrastructure, and talk to what the applications can be. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker. Philippa Minton from Jemena leads National Market Development for Biomethane and Renewable Gas. She will now take us into renewable gas, into the renewable gas space, particularly biomethane, and how Jemena's existing infrastructure is helping industries decarbonise without compromising performance or reliability. Over to you, Philippa.
Thank you. All right, I've just shared my screen and just sharing it into presentation mode. Okay. Just checking, Dan, that's all coming through.
That's working perfectly.
Awesome. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name's Philippa Minton, as Dan said, and I work for Jemena. So today I'm just going to take you through the renewable gas space and have a look at how gas can be decarbonised, and also have a quick look at what gas is used for today and what we foresee it being used for in the future. Okay, so I want to lead in by saying who we are. So Jemena is probably a company that is ill-known by name, but absolutely known by what we do. So what we do is deliver gas to about 1.6 million New South Wales customers and electricity to a further nearly 400,000 customers every day. We're what we call a midstream infrastructure company, meaning we own both gas and electricity infrastructure. So we own the pipes in the ground, the poles and wires that deliver electricity, and also transmission pipelines. Our biggest customer base, as I said, is located in New South Wales, largely through Sydney, Newcastle, Wollongong regions, as well as out into regional New South Wales. Because we work across both gas and electricity, we like to say that we've got a fairly balanced view when it comes to the energy transition. So today I just wanted to start off with what are renewable gases. It's often not known that there is a decarbonisation pathway similar to electricity for gas. So when we talk about it, what are we talking about? What does it look like it should be? So the most prosperous renewable gas that we see being able to decarbonise grid scale, utility scale gas use is what we call biomethane. So biomethane is a renewable form of methane, and it's effectively developed from organic waste. So you can think of it as sewage waste, waste from landfills, so food and garden organics that you might put in your green or FOGO bin at home. And it's also agricultural or animal effluent waste. We capture the gas off that in what we call anaerobic digestion. That just means in big tanks in the absence of oxygen. And we upgrade that to be exactly the same as natural gas that you get today. The second renewable gas that we look at is green hydrogen. This is probably the one that's got a lot of the attention if you've heard about renewable gases in the past. However, its cost margin to natural gas is still quite high today. And that's because it depends on renewable electricity. So to create hydrogen, you take renewable electricity and water, you split the water atom into hydrogen and oxygen, and you're left with hydrogen. At Jemena, we don't probably foresee the future gas utility scale being 100% hydrogen, so having 100% hydrogen flow through to homes and businesses. But what we are exploring at the moment is a 10 to 20% blend of hydrogen mixed in with natural gas or biomethane. And that's because at 10 to 20%, hydrogen is what we call a drop in fuel. So there's absolutely no downstream change required to customers. So therefore, you still turn on your stove at home the exact same, and large businesses still use their boilers and all their downstream equipment with no impact. So that's what we're looking at, about a 10 to 20% blend of green hydrogen. The third is what we call synthetic methane. So it takes green hydrogen and what we call biogenic CO2, which I'll explain in a second. It synthesizes those together in a process called methanation, which can be pressure or temperature dependent, and it creates then more methane. And that's also low emissions. However, this is slightly further away, we see, in terms of the timeline, and that's because it will rely on green hydrogen being cost competitive to then become a drop-in fuel as synthetic methane. So something we often get asked is, when it comes to biomethane, which will be the focus of probably the rest of my talk today. With biomethane, because it is methane, effectively what you're already getting, you still will release CO2. And a lot of people say, how could it be renewable if you're releasing CO2? And the reason it's renewable is because it's the type of CO2 you're releasing. It's what we call biogenic CO2, and it's part of the natural carbon cycle. So when you have fossil natural gas, what we're doing is we're pulling organics that have decomposed over thousands and millions of years under the ground, and we pull them up. And it's what we call a linear process. So you take organics from under the ground as natural gas, you bring them up and you release the CO2, and you're always adding CO2. So therefore, you're not recycling that CO2, and that's what we call excess carbon. However, when you use the natural carbon cycle, the organics that we're utilizing are only releasing carbon that they've absorbed across their short lifetime. So if you think of a crop will grow, and to grow, a crop will absorb CO2 through photosynthesis and then turn it into carbon, which is then the crop that grows. It absorbs that CO2. Once that crop is utilized, let's say it's a corn crop, you might take the corn off it. The rest of the bush is what we would use for biomethane generation. That part goes into the anaerobic digester. It creates the gas. You then use that gas, so use the energy, and then you release that CO2, which would have already been released just by that crop being broken down on site previously. That CO2 is then reabsorbed by that crop, and you're in what we call is the circular economy, or the natural carbon cycle. So biomethane not only is great from a decarbonisation of natural gas point of view, it's also really good when it comes to other abatement issues, especially in regional areas. So a lot of where the feedstocks are for biomethane generation is in regional town centres, and that's where we have agricultural and animal industries. So you take the CO2, you put it in you take the organics, you put it in an anaerobic digester, and what you have left after you've taken the gas is digestate. This is what we call a byproduct of biomethane generation, and it is actually then utilized for a replacement of fossil fertilizers. So it's another decarbonisation benefit for rural New South Wales. The other thing you get is what we call biogenic CO2. So biogas is created through the process. When we clean it up to become biomethane, you have biogenic CO2 left over. And that biogenic CO2 can also displace fossil CO2. So that's in things like pig stunning into your beer, into your soft drinks. So any current use of CO2 today can be replaced by biogenic CO2. So once again, you kind of get three products out of the process. So it's really good from a circular economy point of view. So when it comes to biomethane, you might start to be thinking, well, this is seeming a little bit too good to be true. Why aren't we doing it in Australia? It's not really real. Well, I can tell you that it is real. And it is absolutely proven and has been internationally for, over 20 years, 30 years in some jurisdictions. Europe is the market leader when it comes to biomethane generation, and they currently have approaching 1,700 biomethane facilities throughout Europe alone. The United Kingdom has a further 80. So you've got places like Denmark that their natural gas today is currently over 35% decarbonised using biomethane. And their aim is to be 100% biomethane running through their pipelines by 2030. You've got places like Italy that are over 10% decarbonised. And you've got other jurisdictions that have aims of reaching 100% renewable gas through their pipelines by 2045 and 2050. The United States is another very mature market. They've got over 280. I think they've now got over 300 facilities in operation. So you can see that biomethane is very much done around the world, and it is one of the most credible pathways to decarbonise utility scale gas that exists. So the next thing we often get asked is, what is the potential of biomethane? Is it worth doing, or is it just really small scale? So Australia is very lucky, and we actually have an abundance of feedstocks that we need to create biomethane. The graph in front of you is put together by Bloonomy, who's an energy consultancy. So they did work with the New South Wales government for the Renewable Fuel Strategy, which was released a week ago. And in that work, they had a look at what potential there was for biomethane generation in New South Wales. And then they looked further into the whole of Australia. So what they found from a New South Wales perspective is if you look at the dark blue box, the 56 petajoules, that is what we can classify as industrial gas use in New South Wales. If you look at then the green box, the 68 to 88, this is the realm of biomethane potential that is available in New South Wales today. So that's the amount of biomethane that could be created without really needing too much policy change. So therefore, the waste is already being collected and can be readily utilised. The 137 petajoules of potential is where you might need a policy change. So something like organics that currently you might put in your red bin at home, you might need council to make a call that that's separated into food organics, which then can go to specialist anaerobic digestion facilities to capture that. But what can be seen is New South Wales especially has an absolute abundance of biomethane and renewable gas potential, especially when it comes to our industrial gas use. If you look closer to the to the whole of the East Coast market, you'll see that 96% of total gas consumption could be covered by biomethane. So it's a huge industry. And what it does is it gives an alternative pathway to businesses and households to decarbonize as opposed to electrification. So that next takes me to my next slide, which is who are the customers that we think will actually, that can't readily electrify and may actually need renewable gas in their future? We like to put them into 4 different categories. The first is the one that everyone's probably heard of, and that's what we call hard to abate. So that's your large industry. They're high heat applications. It could be feedstock applications or gas powered generators. So using gas to create electricity. These industries do not have an electrification pathway. So if they do not decarbonize using renewable gases, then they don't have a pathway. So they're the ones that absolutely need gas into the future or they won't exist. The second group of customers, where a lot of the Business New South Wales customers fit into, is what we call costly to electrify. So the costly to electrify pathway is those that theoretically there could be a solution to electrification. But when we compare it to a renewable gas option, we find that renewable gases are a lot cheaper. So they're economically unviable to be able to electrify. Customers that fit in there are places like hospitals, food and beverage manufacturers, and residential customers, some of them. I'll go to some case studies on my next slide. But what we found is if you compare the capital upfront outlay to electrify gas use, it's often very cost prohibitive. And then when you look, though, at a renewable gas pathway, because it's business as usual on the customer side and they just need to buy a certificate to show that they're using renewable gas, it can work out a lot cheaper. It's when you balance CapEx costs for your capital to electrify against your OpEx cost of buying a renewable electricity or a renewable gas certificate. The third category we talk to is those that have a desire for gas. These are the ones that could relatively simply electrify. You might think of your stove at home. You could move it from gas to induction or electricity. However, you have a preference for gas. So there's a lot of people that love cooking on gas, so like instantaneous hot water in their homes, and places like restaurants, bakeries, commercial buildings that also prefer to use gas. You might think of an Italian restaurant or a Chinese restaurant that like gas cooking. So we believe that there should be a pathway for those that want gas, and they should have a choice in their energy needs, and they shouldn't have to compromise on using gas just to have a decarbonized solution. The final is coal to gas switching. So a lot of businesses today are still burning coal behind the meter. And in a lot of instances, what they can do is change that behind the meter coal use. So they're often burning it for thermal energy, and they could switch it to gas. That one switch will increase gas consumption immensely, but it will also decrease total emissions. So if you use BlueScope as an example of this, BlueScope still currently operate out of Port Kembla. They currently use 2 petajoules of natural gas. If they were to switch over their coal use behind the meter for natural gas, they would use around 30 to 40 petajoules of gas. For comparison, currently New South Wales as a total uses about 120 petajoules of gas, so very significant. So they could increase their gas use, but what they would do is help New South Wales as a total to meet 3% of our 2030 targets in one foul swoop, which I think is about 30% of total business decarbonisation that's required. So one change from one large customer can make that bigger emissions reduction difference. So if I go now down to 2 more specific case studies, and what I've tried to pull out is case studies that speak to a bit more of the Business New South Wales customer base. So that's that slightly smaller customer base. So the first is Alsco, who are a leading uniform, linen and commercial laundry service all across Australia. They use natural gas in their boilers, their dryers and their ironing rollers, and effectively they use around 300 terajoules of gas. They're currently putting in a brand new facility in Port Kembla, and they're connecting it to the gas network. This is because they did a very thorough view to look at electrification of their current processes. And what they found was it wasn't economically feasible and in some instances possible for them to actually electrify. So they're building a brand new factory and building brand new gas equipment. That's as of today. What they've found is they could abate over 15,000 tonnes of CO2 a year from all their sites by using biomethane. And it's also the more cost-effective solution that they see. The second is Lion. So Lion is interesting because it's obviously a collection of small to large breweries. They actually use heat, and it's low-grade heat. and that's for steam generation. So it's often thought, especially by policymakers, that low-grade heat can be electrified quite simply and cheaply. However, Lions looked at this and they don't believe it's possible for their large-scale steam generation. They currently use biogas on site, and that is created from their wastes on their sites from their brewing process. And they also, though, need a significant amount of biomethane delivered to them to be able to decarbonise. So both of them are actively pursuing a biomethane pathway because they've done a lot of exploration around their electrification options and found that it's not possible, or it's a lot cheaper to decarbonize using biomethane. All right. I want to take you now into kind of the final part that I'll talk to, and that's the policy landscape. So you might be thinking, it seems like a good solution. Businesses really need this. We have a gas shortfalls that I think Leah will talk to shortly. How come we're not doing it? So a lot of it's been policy driven. Policy in the Australian context, especially the federal context, has really relied on decarbonising our electricity grid. And this is because currently electricity is still delivered to our homes and businesses at about 3 times the emissions intensity of natural gas. So therefore, even with all the decarbonisation efforts that have occurred from an electricity base, it's still 3 times higher emissions than gas is. So therefore, policy needed to focus on this to bring the emissions intensity down and to start displacing coal. However, now the government believes they've got a pathway for electricity. They're looking at gas. So with that has come some supportive policy. And in New South Wales, we probably are in the state today that has the most supportive policy as of a week ago. So businesses now under the National Greenhouse and Energy Reporting Scheme, so that's pretty much the federal emissions accounting scheme that a lot of businesses will fall under, you can now use renewable gases. So before the 1st of July this year, if you bought biomethane or green hydrogen, you had to have the facility located behind the meter with you to be able to decarbonise using it. There was no what we call book and claim system acknowledged within the national framework. So what that means is currently now today, if a producer produces biomethane or green hydrogen anywhere in the East Coast gas market, so it could be Queensland, the Northern Territory, Tasmania, South Australia, Victoria, or New South Wales, they can inject that gas into the East Coast gas market, and any customer in that whole market can now buy the green certificate from that production and use it, surrender it to decarbonise under the National Greenhouse Energy Reporting Scheme. So what this means is natural gas previously, when businesses did their emissions accounting, accounted for about 51 kilos of CO2 per gigajoule. Biomethane, as a comparison, accounts for 0.13 kilos of CO2 per gigajoule. So it's a 99% scope 1 emissions reduction for customers. The other thing to make that work and what was needed was certification. So right now, the renewable gas certificates that exist are by Green Power. So these are the Green Power Renewable Gas Guarantee of Origin certificates. Green Power is a New South Wales accreditation body run out of DQ. However, it's also recognised federally. The federal government, however, is looking at their own certification scheme. This is now complete for hydrogen, and you might have heard of it. It's called the Guarantee of Origin scheme, and will exist for biomethane. The timeline right now says Q1 2026. We've also managed to have updates to the natural gas specification. And so that's the specification that natural gas has to enter utilities shared infrastructure. And what they've done is they've changed some of the parameters to ensure that biomethane can be accounted for and utilised and come in under that specification, as well as blends of green hydrogen. And they've also relaxed some of the limits to make the production of biomethane more economic. The biggest thing that's probably happened at a state level occurred about a week ago. and that was the renewable fuel strategy. So, the renewable fuel strategy is a large list of policy actions that the New South Wales government wants to take to support biomethane and other renewable fuel generation. What they've done is they've highlighted some rural and regional areas that they see as going to be the biomethane hubs and the bioenergy hubs. These places include Griffith, Newcastle, and a fair few more. So they've highlighted where they think bioenergy will be really strong. They've also highlighted what we call the renewable fuel scheme. So the renewable fuel scheme was an existing scheme. It came into legislation in New South Wales about 2 years ago. And it was a green hydrogen production incentive. So what it did was incentivize the production of green hydrogen. However, it's now just been expanded to the production of biomethane. So, what this will do will help close the cost gap between the production cost today of biomethane and a natural gas price. So, it will act to close the gap so that customers who need to decarbonise don't have to pay the full green premium. It will be subsidised through the scheme. That scheme comes into effect from 2028 and is in play till 2038. And so we believe that's the timeline of when we'll start to see large amounts of biomethane flowing into the network and for customers to be able to decarbonise using it, especially in New South Wales from 2028 onwards. So, from a customer point of view and from a chamber point of view, we often get asked, well, what can customers do? How do they get it? So, the first thing we're doing is we want them to talk to their retailers. A lot of people don't know, but of our nearly 6 million gas customers in New South Wales, nearly all of them buy their gas through a retailer. There are some that purchase their gas through self-contracting, so straight from the source, but there's about 15 of them. So of that 1.6 million, there's 15 customers that need to talk directly to gas producers. Everyone else will talk to their retailers. So like it is with renewable electricity, the retailers will likely be the ones that will underwrite the renewable gas projects and then sell it through to the customers. So what retailers have told us is they want to hear from the customer base today to start being able to back these biomethane and renewable gas projects that will come into the grid from 2028 onwards. If anyone's got any more questions, I'm obviously available to answer them later. Otherwise, you can email me or you can go to our website to get more information, which is currently listed on the screen. All right, thank you. Dan, I'll hand back over to you now.
Thanks, Philippa. That was a great presentation. And it was also, it was impressed upon me in the presentation that some of the incredible opportunities that we have as a part of this transition. I was really taken by your point that the opportunity in Sydney in particular, I mean, there are dozens of LGAs that are already asking their residents to separate their waste into green bins alongside yellow for recyclables and red for general waste. And I've just started thinking then about how immense the opportunity could be if those green bins were sent to anaerobic digesters and we started producing biomethane from them.
Yeah, it's such a good thing. So a lot of the green waste today goes to composting. And composting facilities are very similar to biomethane, but they actually release the gases. They don't reuse the energy. You're just left with compost, but you don't get the biogenic CO2 or the biomethane. So we've actually been talking, and there's one very prospective project that's actually looking to change their business model from composting, and their major feedstock source is New South Wales LGAs that are getting rid of their organic waste and do an upgrading project. So they're looking to do that biomethane generation out in regional New South Wales. So they'll take the organic waste from a lot of Sydney LGAs, take it out to their facility in regional New South Wales, into their anaerobic digester, upgrade it and put it back into the gas network. So yeah, it's exactly what we want to see. Waste policy will say that I think every LGA has to have residential food and garden organic waste separated by 2030. So we'll absolutely see that come into action over the next 5 years.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thanks, Philippa. And just a reminder to all of our guests on today's webinar, we are taking live questions. I have seen some start to come through already. So just a reminder, www.slido.com and use the hashtag chamber. Also, I just want to quickly jump in with if you're really interested in learning more about this, we do have a special VIP tour to the Malabar biomethane facility. I've done the tour. It is absolutely fantastic. It's really fascinating with what they've built out there. I'll talk about it a little bit more at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to let you know, in case you haven't come across that invitation yet, that we will be running one of those. I believe it's the next week. So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker, which is Leah Tucker, who is our Senior Policy Manager for Energy and Infrastructure. Leah will share insights from Business New South Wales' Running on Empty 2.0 report, explaining why gas remains essential for business and business competitiveness, and why New South Wales needs from policy and infrastructure to provide affordability, supply certainty, and investor confidence through the transition. Over to you, Leah.
Morning, Dan. Morning, everyone. Thank you for having me. As Dan said, I lead energy at Business New South Wales, and today I'm going to be talking about our upcoming gas paper. Just going to get to sharing. How's that, Dan? Can you see it?
Yep. I just need to go to full screen.
Can you see that, Dan?
It's still on normal view.
That's fine. It's coming. All right. How's
Perfect.
that? Sorry, everyone. I don't use Zoom very often. All right. So today I'm here to talk about this upcoming advocacy paper that we've written at Business New South Wales, and we're really excited about. It's called Running on Empty 2.0, the evolving role of gas in New South Wales. And I just wanted to give some context of why we've done it. Apart from the obvious and what Philippa just talked about, which seems obviously like great opportunities to decarbonise and renewable gas. In 2019, we wrote a Running on Empty report where we looked at the gas supply shortfalls and we called on government for some urgent action on it. But since 2019, the energy landscape's changed dramatically in New South Wales. So from then to now, we've legislated net zero targets by 2050. Those have just been upped by the Commonwealth government. We've got interim targets. And in between that, we've also had like global shocks such as, the war in Ukraine, instability in the Middle East, which disrupted international energy markets, increased prices, and it sort of highlighted the need for secure and affordable domestic supply. So really this report revisits that question where we look at the gas industry within this context, where we are today. We look at its impact to business, and especially those gas-reliant businesses that's not so easy to electrify. And we're calling on government for some new recommendations. So just to get started, where are we as an industry overview? So New South Wales currently doesn't produce any of its own natural gas. There are a few gas fields in Wilga Park near Narrabri that currently powers about 32,000 homes. So that's gas power generation. And that's run by Santos at the moment. But apart from that, we get all our gas from interstate, especially the southern basins in Victoria. And at this point in time, as of, March this year, when the gas statement, AEMO released their gas statement of opportunities, they highlighted that, risk of gas shortfalls are real and approaching quickly. And those gas production from the southern basins is actually declining. The pipeline infrastructure is constrained, but demand across the East Coast is still high. And from 2028, they've predicted that we're going to see peak day and seasonal supply gaps across the southern states, including New South Wales. And by 2029, those could occur on an annual basis. So there have been quite a few things in policy, but I guess one of the main things to mention the Commonwealth government did in response to the emerging issues is that they released their future gas strategy in mid-2024. And why I mention that is because the strategy confirmed that gas remains essential for supporting our economy, particularly through a net zero transition, which we're still on that path, and that gas will be required for firming renewables, supporting manufacturing, and ensuring energy security during the transition. It's also worth noting that gas prices have eased slightly since 2022, mostly as a result of the war in Ukraine. However, they are at a historical high, and volatility remains a huge concern, especially with a tightening supply and rising demand on the near-term horizon. So how does this impact business? So at Business New South Wales, we're consistently hearing concerns about gas prices, but more so not just prices, but the certainty of supply and the growing risks of future competitiveness for businesses. It's really not a new issue, but it is becoming more urgent and consequential with the transition. For many businesses, gas isn't just a simple input, it's a critical enabler of their day-to-day operations. And as I said earlier, lots of businesses can't simply electrify. And this is either because the technology doesn't exist or it's just not commercially viable at this point in time. So this means that, I guess, gas demand isn't going away. And at Business New South Wales, we really recognise that and that is essential for industries such as mining, manufacturing, agriculture, even some small businesses. But those bigger industries, they're not just fringe industries, they're core to our economy. And we want to see them growing, not just surviving. So we're really at risk at this point of losing jobs and investment in whole industries without sort of the certainty of gas in our future. So to support these industries, and we do support going to a low carbon future, we just need a pathway for affordable and reliable gas. And with my recommendations, Philip has already talked to some progress with government lately, which has been really positive in this front. But we believe that supporting gas-reliant businesses is essential in New South Wales, and and that we can manage it sensibly with a transition and with a goal to decarbonise. So what needs to be done? So we're making format recommendations to the New South Wales government, and I think it's worth noting that the gas statement of opportunities that I mentioned earlier this year recognise that it's not just one, but we need a combination of solutions to ensure supply and reliability of gas. So our first recommendation is unlocking new sources of natural gas. In our 2019 report, we also supported Narrabri. Since then, Narrabri has not progressed. It's been approved. It's progressed, but they keep going back to court. So Narrabri could provide in the short term New South Wales with up to 20 years of its gas usage, which would be great. So we support that still. We support the approval and progress of Narrabri. But at the same time, we also recognise the challenges with that. So we're recommending to explore other reserves and put those development pathways through quicker, and as well as LNG import terminals. Second, we're talking to gas infrastructure needing to be recognised as a strategic enabler of the energy transition. I think with Philippa's talk, it really shows that. Pipeline storage, distribution networks, they carry conventional gas, but they can also carry renewable gas in the future. So we really need to be having some sort of regulatory certainty and investment-friendly reforms to upgrade and repurpose this infrastructure. And that's for biomethane, but as well as, for hydrogen blending too. We need to avoid at all costs stranded assets and costly disruptions. And we need to stop, banning new gas in buildings and support a future of renewable gas. And that moves into our third recommendation, which is essentially supporting the renewable gas industry. And I feel like Philip has really covered this on the particulars, but I just say that on a policy side, and she did mention some of it, but we really need sort of long-term policy signals, which some are really coming through this year, and it's been a really positive year. But we need to remove those development barriers, and we really believe in aligning renewable gas initiatives with industrial growth strategies to support industry. Because this is going to unlock clean manufacturing, regional jobs, and resilient industries. The last recommendation we're making is to ensure a reliable transition to low-emission electricity. This is really stating that we need gas to support the grid during the transition. We need reliable, long-duration gas generation to support that grid as our coal power retires. Without investment certainty in it, we're risking the loss of that firming capability, and we risk that energy reliability in the future. So we're suggesting that New South Wales adopt a state-based capacity mechanism to underwrite dispatchable gas assets, ensuring system reliability while complementing the renewable energy growth. And I think it's worth noting that South Australia have actually done this at the moment, and we're suggesting that New South Wales do their own bespoke one. So my presentation is quite short, but I guess in summary, we've tried to give a holistic number of recommendations that the government can actually adopt that's not unrealistic at this point in time to support those gas reliant businesses, and not just support them to survive now, but so they can grow in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Leah. Great presentation. That brings us into our Q&A segment now. And just a quick one final reminder, I promise I'll stop pestering you all, but if you do want to submit any questions, slido.com and #chamber. So I might start with a really broad question for you both. And I'll start with you, Philippa. What's the biggest misconception about gas in Australia's energy transition?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, the biggest misconception is probably just really simple. It's that can it be decarbonised? A lot of people don't think it can. So they think to decarbonise gas, they need to get rid of it, which is obviously a costly exercise. So I think the more we can educate business owners on all of their decarbonisation pathways, the cheaper the energy transition will be, because they'll be able to evaluate all their options and find the lowest cost decarbonisation pathway.
Thanks, and Leah?
Well, I do actually agree with Philippa in that, and that would be my answer. But I would also add that I think people miss out that gas isn't all bad either. It's a lot lower than coal in terms of emissions. And I think we need to remember that and have a sensible transition to support business and industry. And also that a lot of businesses who rely on gas, even if they can electrify, it's so costly. And at the moment, to do that with insurance and cost of living is just incredibly difficult.
Yeah.
So I think to recognize that gas isn't this big bad thing, but it actually supports industry at a lower emission than coal, is really important. And I've been to some regions in New South Wales, and some people don't actually know that. But the future of renewable gas is really the part that everyone should be talking about now.
Absolutely. And just to expand upon that, Leah, what is the risk to New South Wales if Australia falls behind?
Well, I guess we're going to have businesses moving state, then overseas. So, or just closing. And we've already seen some close. And, there's industry where they, supply hundreds of jobs to people, potentially thousands. So it's a real risk to our economy and, people's jobs. But also we want to keep that industry onshore for that potential and growth. So we don't have that investment certainty now. We're going to lose people now. And even if we've grown that renewable gas industry later on, it's much harder to move back and much more unlikely people are going to move back.
Yep. Philippa, on the call today are the presidents and executive of local chambers of commerce across New South Wales. And they represent tens of thousands of businesses, a vast majority of which are in the small to medium business segment. Can SMEs access biomethane or renewable gas, or is this mainly just for large manufacturers at the moment?
Yeah, so they can definitely access it. Right now, the availability is limited. Us at Jemena, we own a biomethane facility and we inject it into the gas network as a demonstration plant at Malabar. As you mentioned, we'll take a tour through there. So that gas is currently available. We sell that gas to a retailer very publicly. We sell that to Origin Energy. So Origin Energy is currently the only retailer that can retail renewable gas because they're the only ones that have it. But what that means is it's absolutely available for all customers. Right now, today, green power certificates can't be surrendered for households, but they can be surrendered for any small business. So any small business can surrender green power certificates, small and large business, as long as you have an ABN, you can utilize it. Once the federal guarantee of origin scheme comes in play, likely early next year for biomethane, residential customers will also be able to decarbonise using it. So yeah, it's completely available. And it's really simple. If you think of it the same as renewable electricity was brought forward largely from government targets. So what we call the RET, the Renewable Energy Target, came into play in 2001. What that meant was it mandated all Australian everyone that used electricity in Australia had to buy a certain percentage of renewable electricity. Yep. There's no such equivalent for gas federally. So right now, businesses, it could be that they voluntarily decide. Some businesses are mandated to decarbonise. So whatever the driving factor is and whatever size business you are, you can absolutely all access renewable gas. And that's why we say the best way to start is the conversations with the retailer. So then the retailer can back to back that interest and that want for renewable gas with the contracts they go out and buy the renewable gas from up and coming projects.
Okay, and that leads in perfectly to a question that one of our guests has asked, which is how much renewable gas can current pipelines handle without major retrofits?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So if I lower it to the two, or delineate it between the two renewable gases, so from a biomethane perspective, it's dropping. So it's 100% replacement of natural gas, 100% pipelines, 100% into your home. Because it's a methane-based gas, there's absolutely no chemical difference with biomethane to natural gas. So therefore, pipelines can take it today, tomorrow, forever, the same as your equipment will be able to. So there's no changes anywhere. When we look at hydrogen, that's slightly different. So hydrogen is a different molecule. It's the other renewable gas we talk to. And right now, pipelines can pretty safely take, we see about 10 to 20% without any change. So you can blend that into either biomethane or natural gas. However, at higher quantities, it depends what pipeline it is, what it's constructed of, and what pressure it runs at. So hydrogen is a bit different. Biomethane, completely drop in. If we could produce enough biomethane, then it can completely reduce and eliminate natural gas. Hydrogen, still a little bit different. Customers downstream would need to change their equipment if we go above blends of about 20%. And the same as our pipelines, there'll be some changes that will need to occur.
Great. And another question for you, Philippa, from one of our guests. How do sustainability risks such as feedstock availability or land use impacts get managed?
Yeah, so it's a good question. And the government's been grappling with this one for a while. So we've worked with both the federal and the state governments on this one. The good thing with biomethane, and that's probably in comparison, if you know the bioenergy space, there's liquid fuels. Those are things like synthetic aviation fuels and biodiesels and things. And then you've got biomethane. Biomethane is largely generated from a waste component, so of the plant or the crops. So what that means is if you grow, as I mentioned, a corn crop, you still take the corn, it's used how it always was, and biomethane uses a lot of the waste. So it's a bit different in that way that it's not competing with food. So there's no food versus fuel debate when it comes to biomethane. The food versus fuel debate comes a bit more in when you're looking at synthetic aviation fuels and things like that, because they more want traditional feedstocks that could be used for food or energy crops. But right now for biomethane, all the government is starting on is utilizing existing waste. So the food versus fuel doesn't exist. What they will also look at is probably things like cover cropping, because you can put some quite energy dense crops down on land that maybe is marginal land, so not good for food crops. So they could be new crops there. So we do actually see it being a potential for the agriculture industry to scale. But with biomethane, there's not so much of a food fuel debate that occurs because the feedstocks are waste sources as opposed to traditional food sources.
Okay. And a question for you both now, and I'll start with you, Leah. Does renewable gas help address Scope 1 or Scope 2 obligations under the safeguard mechanism?
I could answer that, but I feel like Philippa can answer in so much better detail. Short answer, yes.
Sure.
I can answer. I'm sure you could have done it, Leah. But so yeah, so renewable gas is typically your Scope 1. So when you look at when a customer looks at their emissions, or you in your house, your Scope 1 emissions are those that you actually release. So that's any emissions. CO2 will be a major one that you actually release on site. So if you think of burning gas, when you turn on your stove, your combustion product is CO2. That's what we call a Scope 1 emission. So that's what natural gas is. A Scope 2 emission is traditionally your electricity, a business's electricity usage. And what that is that electricity, when you turn on your light, you're not actually releasing any emissions. That's why it's called scope 2, because they're not actually coming out at your property. However, to produce that electricity, there are emissions that were involved to create it. So that's your scope 2. So things like the safeguard mechanism that look at scope 1 emissions, and you need to decrease your scope 1 emissions. So when you electrify, you often take, say, your natural gas, your scope 1 emissions, and you move them to scope 2 emissions. And that's because you electrify them. And if you're not then using a renewable source of electricity, which, say, in your home, a lot of people wouldn't be, then you've actually just moved scope 1 to scope 2 and often increased your emissions. So when we look at gas, we're pretty much always talking about a customer's scope 1 emissions, and renewable gas, decreases those scope 1 emissions by right now about over 99% scope 1 emission reduction when you replace natural gas with biomethane or hydrogen.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Philippa. One of our guests has asked, is this just for the large players, or can small to medium manufacturers participate in the renewable gas transition as well?
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's for anyone. So green power certificates can be surrendered for everyone except residential at this point in time. So any size business, as long as you have an ABN, you can release them. So the good thing about green power, and businesses are probably familiar with green power, because green power is your kind of gold standard of renewable electricity certification. So as a business, if you surrender green power renewable electricity certificates, you get registered on the Green Power website, which is a government website, and you kind of get the green power tick of approval. The same is true for gas. So Green Power the project producer who's producing the renewable gas, registers under Green Power, surrenders the certificates, creates the certificates, and then they can be surrendered on behalf of any customers at the moment except for residential.
Excellent. So big picture question for you both. In 5 to 10 years, what could success look like for New South Wales on the renewable gas front?
Do you want to go first, Leah?
Well, mine's more of a business side. I hope to see it used by a lot more businesses in helping businesses have cheaper decarbonized energy sources, and that we're seeing businesses growing as a result. As I said, it's been a pretty tough few years in business, and we talk about it a lot at New South Wales, but to see a network of expanded renewable gas that's been uptaken by those gas-reliant businesses and helping them thrive, I would call it success.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I would say that success looks like effectively the New South Wales government, in the strategy that they released, they have a target of 15% industrial decarbonisation using gas by 2035. I think if we can get there, and we should get there because it's quite a soft target, we think. But I think that will be absolute progress in 10 years. If we're 15% industrial gas decarb, we hope to be 15% total gas decarb at least by then. But I think that will be a really good starting point too.
And tell me, Philippa, what role will gas networks like Jemena's play in actually delivering these renewable gases at scale?
Yeah, it's a good question. So from an infrastructure point of view, we're not gas producers, so we won't be the ones out there producing the gas, and we don't sell gas. We're not a retailer. So our bread and butter is effectively in owning infrastructure. So what we're looking at is trying to lower the cost of biomethane to our end customers by building the connection. So if there's existing gas infrastructure and a project is a few kilometres away from that, we'll extend the gas network out to meet the project so that gas can flow into the shared infrastructure and be delivered to customers. So that takes that cost component off the project, and therefore lowers the cost of biomethane to end customers. So our job will largely be bringing that renewable gas, largely probably from regional New South Wales, into the more demand centres of Sydney, Newcastle and Wollongong, and all the industrial customers along the way.
Great. And a question for you both. I'll start with you, Leah. From an industry perspective, what support, policy, financial or regulatory, is most critical?
It's a good question, Dan. I would just recognise what Philip has said though, and the release of the renewable fuel strategy it's just such a great step forward. And this year as well, you know, the NGERS, which is the National Greenhouse Emissions sort of framework, also recognised biomethane. So I think those are two big policy steps. But like Philippa said, you know, I think we need to raise those targets a bit. We need to down regulation and cut a bit of red tape in terms of development and planning side of this. And I go to the recommendation we talked about, infrastructure, investing and recognizing our infrastructure and giving it certainty, and as well as policy to allow, I guess, more exploration of natural gas right now that we know of, because we need it in the short term while the biomethane market grows. So it's a few asks of different views of the long-term future of gas, because we need short-term, medium-term, and long-term policy signals.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Philippa, from a Jemena perspective?
Yeah, I think policy, right? So we've done a lot of work in this market. We've probably got the foundations of a market now, as Leah said, only as of this year, which is very late. But we've got certification, we've got recognition of those certificates, that they are, that, what their emissions intensity is, that they are very almost zero emissions version of gas. So now we need the policy to close the cost gap. So we've got businesses that are struggling with their decarbonisation pathway with the cost of energy. So we need to ensure that their decarbonisation option is as cheap as it can possibly be. And therefore we need to ensure, just like it does with renewable electricity, policy and government funds start to close the gap, the cost gap of what customers can pay and what producers can produce it at, and get investment to create those projects. So right now, those two things don't balance out. So that's why we don't have renewable gas. So we need government to close that that willingness to pay gap. The risk lies in the fact that our Asian neighbors, so largely Singapore and Japan, have now started to really focus on renewable gas, biomethane markets. They've got targets for what they want to see. So what we're seeing starting to happen in Australia is, because we're very abundant on feedstocks and we can produce biomethane and other liquid fuels at scale, we're seeing that investment start to want to come in from Asia. However, they want to export the commodity. And what that will mean for Australian businesses is that their decarbonisation pathway will be taken away, and they won't have the potential to decarbonise using gas and therefore export low carbon embodied goods or goods to Australian markets, low carbon embodied goods products. That gas will flow overseas. And that's kind of the issue we have right now with natural gas, and how we found ourselves where we are today is due to the export contracts, and therefore there not being enough gas in Australia at the moment. So I think we're in a very dangerous place when it comes to renewable gas at the moment, because policy and willingness to pay is being driven internationally. And right now the gas might flow there if Australian policy doesn't catch up and ensure that Australian businesses can use the gas.
So it sounds like we need a lot of advocacy, which brings me to my last question for today. Philippa, on this call, we have our chamber presidents. As I mentioned before, they represent tens of thousands of businesses across New South Wales. If they've gotten really excited by what you've talked about today, and they want to sort of take that message out to their members, how can they get involved?
Yeah, so absolutely. As I said, if they've got anything they want from us, we can always come. Pretty much my team's whole job is to do advocacy and education when it comes to renewable gas. That's with policy and our end customers. So at any point anyone wants more information, they can reach out to us here at Jemena, and we can give them more information. You can visit the Green Power website. They've got some amazing fact sheets. They're all like from the government. So they're, third party endorsed, government endorsed. So you'll see that come through. So it's a really good resource. The other one is called Bioenergy Australia, and Bioenergy Australia is the peak body for the bioenergy industry. So customers can go there, find out more information. If they really want to get involved, they can join up there as well. So there's a lot of market resources, but yeah, feel free to reach out to me. You'll have the slides from today. Happy to share them. So yeah, they can utilize those.
Fantastic. Well, that's great, because what we'll do is we'll share those in our post-event thank you email. So Lee Toomey will reach out to all of you presidents with that information. And as Philippa said, please feel free to reach out if you've got any more questions or you want to get more involved. So I'd like to close by saying thank you to Leah and to Philippa for their fantastic presentations today. And just a reminder that you have an exclusive invitation to a VIP tour of Australia's first biomethane network injection facility. That's being hosted on the 9th of December from 1:30 to 3 p.m. And it's at Fisherman's Road in Malabar, which is about 30 minutes south of the Sydney CBD. This innovative site transforms renewable biogas from wastewater into New South Wales Green Power certified carbon neutral biomethane. It already supplies enough clean energy to meet the annual needs of 6,300 homes. As I mentioned before, I've done the tour. It's fascinating, and it's really good to actually see it up close in person. There's only spots for 12 people, so if you are interested, I urge you to register quickly. Lee Toomey did send out an email last week, but we'll also re-include that in the post-event email that goes for this. So please register, and if you are intending on coming, we do need your registrations by Wednesday morning at the latest, because it is a secure facility, so we have to register everything well in advance to make sure that everybody can attend. So thank you all again for joining us today. This is potentially the last local chamber presidents webinar that I'm hosting for the year, so I'd like to wish you, your members, your families, and your loved ones all a very safe and happy holiday season. Merry Christmas to you all, and I look forward